All right, guys, we have reached the end of this part of the unit. So remember, we have been trying to figure out the rock candy phenomena. So our big question is, can rock candy be made using artificial sugar, or it's sometimes called sweetener? So as a review, remember this was our phenomena. So it says a candy maker was making rock candy for a child's birthday party. They were asked to create sugar-free rock candy. The candy maker followed their regular recipe for the candy with sugar and then substituted Splenda, which is sweetener, for the sugar-free candy. The regular candy came out just fine, but the Splenda rock candy didn't form at all. So remember in this picture here, you can see that this is regular rock candy and it was made with regular sugar and it came out as regular crystallized rock candy, but the kind that was made with sweetener did not work at all. Okay, so to answer this question and figure out our phenomena, we are going to be doing a CER, and this will be your big grade for this unit. So hopefully you have heard of a CER before, but we're going to review what is a CER. So remember, the C in CER stands for claim. So a claim is a one-sentence answer to the question being investigated. So remember, our big question is, can rock candy be made from sweetener? So we're just going to answer that question. So you have two choices for this particular CER for your claim. You can either claim that artificial sugar, which is sweetener, can be used to form rock candy, or artificial sugar cannot be used to form rock candy. I'm assuming that most of you would know that you have to pick this one because the other one, as we know from the scenario, is not true. The E in CER stands for evidence. So this is the data, the observations, and the facts that you can use to support the claim. So in evidence, you are not saying anything about because, you're not explaining anything yet, you are just simply stating the evidence. You could even use like bullet points to explain your evidence. So you could have like evidence 1 and then give your evidence, evidence 2 and then give your evidence. So evidence is just straight up data or facts. So what do you need for this particular CER? So you should have some evidence related to properties of sugar and artificial sugar. So remember, we talked about like the density, we looked at the way that they look and other physical properties. You should also have some evidence related to their elements. So what are they made of? What elements do they have in them? And what does that have to do with them? And then you should have some evidence related to their structure. So again, remember, you are not explaining in your evidence. Evidence is just stating the observations, the data, the facts. And we're going to go through some of these pieces of evidence in a little bit in this video. The R in CER stands for reasoning. So your reasoning, this is where you actually explain how the evidence supports the claim. So you've already given all of your evidence. Now you have to connect your evidence to your claim. So this is where you're going to start saying things like because, blah, 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 blah. And this is where you explain. So you should have reasoning for each piece of evidence that you gave. So if you gave 3 pieces of evidence, then I would expect to see 3 kind of connections explaining how those pieces of evidence support your claim. So for example, because sugar is blank, this means that blank. This supports the claim that artificial sugar cannot be used to make rock candy. So making sure that you're connecting your evidence back to your claim is your whole goal in the reasoning. You're really using what you've learned. This is where I can tell, in the reasoning is where I can tell that you have learned something during these last few weeks. So here's a quick example of a CER. And this obviously has nothing to do with your rock candy. This is just an example. So their claim is that all living things are made of at least 1 or more cells. The evidence for that claim: cells were observed in plants under the microscope. Cells were observed in animals under the microscope. Cells were observed in bacteria under the microscope. Cells were not observed in a piece of string. Cells were not observed in a piece of newspaper. So notice that their evidence is just giving the facts. It's giving what was observed and what was not observed. Now in the reasoning is where they're going to connect the evidence back to the claim. Cells were observed in plants, animals, and bacteria under a microscope. Plants, animals, and bacteria are all living things. Therefore, this evidence shows that all living things contain at least one cell. Cells were not observed in string and newspaper. These are non-living things. Therefore, this evidence supports the claim that all living things contain at least one cell because they were not seen in non-living things. So, again, give your claim, your evidence states the facts or the data, and then the reasoning backs up and it kind of connects how the claim or evidence supports the claim. So we're going to quickly review some of the evidence that we have gained during the past few weeks while we have been learning about properties of matter. So one of the things that we talked about was the property of density of sugar versus Splenda, and this is from your assignment on Tuesday, September 8th. So you can go back in your Drive or go back in your Google Classroom and find that assignment, and you'll be able to access this video to rewatch it so that you can get some of that evidence. But as you can see in this data table, we have some information about Splenda versus sugar. So one thing that we want to pay attention to is the density of sugar versus Splenda. So if you were going to use this piece of evidence to support your claim, in your reasoning, you would want to explain what the density means and why that has something to do with the forming of rock candy. Another piece of evidence that you might use is just the way that the sugar versus the Splenda looks. So if you look carefully, you can see here the sugar, it's kind of more like grainy, like sand, whereas this is the Splenda and it's kind of more powdery, like powdered sugar. It's a little bit more white. Sugar is a little more like translucent or clear. So again, you could use this information as your evidence and then explain it more in your reasoning. Another piece of evidence that you might use is talking about the molecular structure of sugar versus Splenda. So remember we talked about amorphous versus crystalline. So you would have to go back and look at what those two things mean and figure out what that has to do with the rock candy. So this picture is showing Splenda, and here you have your sugar. So think about which one is amorphous, which one is crystalline, and how does that have something to do with the formation of the rock candy. So this is something new that you haven't seen yet, but you can still use this as evidence. So you can find this picture, I'll link it, but you can find this picture on Google. But this is a view of Splenda under the microscope. And this is like regular sugar that you eat. So look carefully and think about what that might have to do with why the rock candy would form differently. So again, you can use the picture as evidence, and then in your reasoning, you could explain why those might have something to do with supporting your claim. Okay, so this is something new too that we haven't looked at yet, but we've talked about elements, and we've talked about how compounds can form, how elements can form compounds and molecules, and then how those molecules join together to create structures that are different from each other. So if you look closely at both of these, you have sugar up here, and then down here you have the sucralose or the Splenda, which is the sweetener. So it's showing you the different structures of those two things. So look really closely at both of them and see if you notice any differences in the elements that are in them. So in this first one up here, in sugar, you see a lot of carbons, you see some hydrogens, you see oxygen, and that's pretty much all you have. You have oxygens, you have hydrogens, and you have carbons. And those are pretty much the only elements that are in sugar. Now, if you look at the Splenda, look carefully. Do you see anything other than carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen? You should see there are elements of Cl in these. So Cl, another one down here, Cl is actually chlorine, which is not like chlorine you put in a pool, it's different. It's the element chlorine. So this is actually showing you that there is a difference in the chemical structure. So again, this could be a piece of evidence that you use, and then you explain how that difference might have something to do with why the rock candy does not form with the Splenda. So real quick, remember this is the periodic table. I just wanted to point out that chlorine, what we just talked about, is over here. You have carbon here, oxygen here, and hydrogen here. So those were all the elements that were found in both the sugar, and then the chlorine was the one that was in just the sucralose. So maybe this has something to do with it. You could also use the periodic table and explain how where the elements are might have something to do with their properties. Okay, so with all this information that you got today, remember for this unit, your grade is going to come from writing your claim evidence reasoning. So your claim is going to be the answer to the question, can sweetener be made, can sweetener be used to make rock candy, So you're going to answer that question in your claim. Then you're going to present your evidence. So you're going to have at least 3 pieces of evidence. Then you're going to give your reasoning, and you're going to explain how your evidence connects to your claim. So this is what you're going to be working on today and on Friday. And that will be your big assignment for this unit. All right, let me know if you have questions, and hopefully this helped explain some things so that it will help you with any questions that you might have had.